Los Angeles, summer of 2004. A city of lights, cameras, and endless auditions. 24-year-old Emma Scott arrived with the same dream thousands carried, to make it in Hollywood. She had grown up in San Diego, the daughter of a school teacher and an engineer. She wasn't born into wealth, she wasn't connected to the industry, but she carried herself with a confidence that drew attention. Friends said Emma believed she was on the edge of a breakthrough. On July 12th, she spent the day at a casting call in West Hollywood. Later that night, she was spotted at a trendy bar where industry insiders gathered after long days of filming. Cameras outside caught her leaving just before midnight. She wasn't alone. Walking beside her was Paul Henderson, a well-known producer with powerful connections, and a family at home. That footage would be the last time anyone ever saw Emma alive. When her car was discovered abandoned near the highway days later, the mystery deepened. The keys were still inside, but her phone and personal items were missing. Rumors spread quickly. Some said Emma had been silenced because she knew too much. Others whispered about secret tapes, private parties, and a scandal that could shatter reputations in Hollywood. Investigators zeroed in on 3 suspects: Henderson, the married producer; Ryan Blake, Emma's troubled ex-boyfriend; and Linda Gray, a fellow actress who saw Emma as a threat. Each had motive, each had secrets. One of them, the police believed, knew exactly what happened to Emma. For years the case would twist and turn, with one suspect nearly sent to prison after a forced confession. But the truth, the real killer, remained hidden in plain sight. And when it finally came out, it shocked even the detectives who had chased the case from the beginning. Emma Scott came to Hollywood chasing a dream. Instead, her disappearance became one of its darkest stories. Emma Scott was born in San Diego in 1980. She grew up in a modest middle-class home in a quiet neighborhood. Her father worked as an electrical engineer. Her mother taught elementary school. It was a stable family, but far from. At the age of 20, Emma made her move. She packed her things, rented a tiny apartment in West Hollywood, and threw herself into the city. The place was expensive, competitive, and intimidating, but Emma had no intention of turning back. Like many aspiring actors, she had to work to survive. She took shifts at a local bar serving drinks late into the night. The money was just enough to cover rent and groceries. During the day, she ran from one casting call to another, standing in long lines, competing with hundreds of other hopefuls for the same role. Her early years in Los Angeles were tough. Most auditions led nowhere. A few gave her walk-on roles barely noticeable on screen. But within the indie film circuit, she started to get noticed. She had a look directors liked, youthful, approachable, with a certain confidence that showed up on camera. People in the industry began to talk about her as someone with potential, someone who just needed the right break. Emma's first real opportunities came in small, independent productions. These weren't major films. They were low-budget projects screened at festivals, seen by limited audiences. Still, they gave her exposure. In one film, she played a supporting role as a waitress in a gritty drama. In another, she appeared briefly as a college student in a coming-of-age story. Her parts were small, but her performances were solid. Critics who noticed her called her natural and unforced. It wasn't long before invitations started arriving. She was asked to attend networking events, rap parties, and industry mixers. Some of these were legitimate industry gatherings. Others were less official, private get-togethers where the lines between business and pleasure blurred. Emma went, hoping to make connections just like every young actor trying to climb. By 2003, Emma had built a modest but growing reputation. She was no star, but she was visible in the indie world. Casting directors kept her name on file. She had a circle of friends in the industry. She even had representation, a small agency that believed she could break through if given the right chance. Still, life was far from easy. Hollywood was expensive, and acting work was unpredictable. Serving drinks at night was her safety net, but Emma hated relying on it. She wanted to live from acting, not bartending. Every audition mattered, every meeting mattered. She told her friends repeatedly, "If I can land one strong role, everything changes." But with visibility came whispers. As Emma appeared at more events, rumors began to circulate. People said she was getting attention because she knew how to charm producers, not because of her talent. Some suggested she was trading favors for auditions. None of it was proven. Most of it came from rivals or people looking to discredit her. Still, the rumors spread fast, as they often do in Hollywood. Friends who knew her defended her. They insisted she was serious about her craft, that she worked hard and didn't deserve the gossip. But Emma didn't deny that the industry was filled with compromises. She admitted more than once that she hated how things worked, but she wasn't going to walk away. Despite the chatter, Emma pushed forward. She continued to audition, continued to work late nights, and continued to fight for her place. She often said she would never forgive herself if she quit and went back to San Diego. By 2004, she was at a turning point. A new independent film was casting, one with a bigger budget and stronger distribution than anything she had done before. The role was exactly the kind of part Emma wanted. A lead supporting character with depth, the kind of role that could change her career. She told her friends this was the break she had been waiting for. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, Emma seemed more determined than ever. She told one friend, "This is it. If I don't give everything now, I'll never get out of waiting tables." She had circled the date of the audition on her calendar. She rehearsed constantly, and she spoke of little else. The night she went missing came just after that casting call. She left the audition in high spirits, telling friends she thought it had gone well. That evening she went to a bar in West Hollywood where producers and actors often gathered. It was a familiar place, part of her network, part of her routine. What happened after would turn her story from the dream of an actress into the nightmare of a disappearance. But at the start of that summer, Emma Scott was just another young woman chasing Hollywood, believing she was finally close to the role that would change her life forever. July 12, 2004. It was supposed to be just another casting day in Los Angeles, but for Emma Scott, it would be her last. That morning, Emma walked into a small casting studio in West Hollywood. She was 24 years old, hungry for a break, and she believed this might be the one. The indie film wasn't big budget, but the director had connections. Friends later said she called them after leaving the audition, her voice upbeat, saying she felt like she had impressed the room. For once, she thought Hollywood might finally open a door.
That afternoon, Emma phoned a close friend. She said she planned to go out later that night, to meet a few people in the business. It wasn't unusual for her. Networking in Los Angeles often happened not in offices, but in bars, lounges, and private parties. By nightfall, Emma appeared at a high-end bar in West Hollywood, a place where producers, directors, and actors often gathered after hours. Several patrons remembered seeing her there. She was drinking a cocktail, chatting with a small group of people connected to the film industry. Witnesses said she seemed relaxed but also focused, like she was there with a purpose. Rumors later swirled that Emma was discussing an after-hours gathering, one of those infamous private parties that circled through the industry, where deals and relationships blurred behind closed doors. Nothing about those whispers could be confirmed, but people close to Emma always believed she knew far more about the hidden side of Hollywood than she ever let on. Around midnight, cameras outside the bar captured a moment that would become critical evidence. Emma walked out the front doors beside Paul Henderson, a married film producer with a history of whispered scandals. Henderson was older, wealthy, and well-connected, and he was the last person ever seen with Emma alive. The footage showed them stepping toward a dark car, the headlights flicking on as the two climbed inside. Then the vehicle pulled away, swallowed by the Los Angeles night. Emma never returned home. 3 days later, her car was discovered abandoned near a stretch of highway just outside the city. The vehicle was unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition. Inside, her purse was gone. Her phone was missing. Items Emma always carried with her had vanished. Police noted a few faint stains on the seat fabric, but nothing definitive. There were no clear signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no blood. It looked more like the car had simply been left there, staged, than deserted in panic. When police questioned Paul Henderson, his story raised red flags almost immediately. He claimed he had only offered Emma a ride after the bar, dropping her off at a hotel. After that, he said, he went home. But investigators quickly discovered there was no record of Emma ever checking into any hotel that night. Hotel staff and security confirmed no one matching her description had arrived. Even more suspicious, witnesses around the hotel reported nothing unusual. No Emma.
Meanwhile, speculation exploded. The press latched onto the story, branding it the Hollywood disappearance. Tabloids ran stories about Emma's rumored connections, printing grainy photos of her with different industry figures. Whispers of secret parties and compromising tapes filled headlines. Some of Emma's friends told reporters that she had recently confided about knowing too much about certain people. One even recalled her joking nervously that if she ever disappeared, it wouldn't be an accident. Those words took on a haunting weight after July 2004. There was also talk of a missing tape. A former assistant in the industry later suggested a recording existed showing Emma at a private gathering only days before she vanished. That tape, if real, disappeared the same week Emma did. No one could produce it. But the rumor alone deepened suspicions that Emma's disappearance wasn't random. It was deliberate. Investigators pulled surveillance from the bar, interviewed staff, and cross-checked every name Emma was seen speaking with that night. Every lead circled back to the same detail. Emma left with Paul Henderson, and after that, the trail ended. Her car offered few answers. Forensics teams scoured it for fingerprints, hair, fibers, anything. The results were inconclusive. There was nothing that clearly connected Henderson or anyone else to the vehicle. The absence of evidence made the case even more frustrating. Without Emma's body, prosecutors knew any case built on circumstantial details could collapse. Still, inconsistencies in Henderson's statements remained troubling. He insisted he left Emma at a hotel, but phone records showed his cell pinged near the same stretch of highway where Emma's car was later found. When pressed, he brushed it off as coincidence, claiming he had driven that way home. His attorneys reinforced the story. With his money, influence, and an experienced legal team, Henderson was able to stall any formal charges. The case grew colder by the day. For Emma's family, the waiting was agony. Her parents traveled from San Diego to Los Angeles, putting up missing posters, speaking to media outlets, begging for information. For weeks, Emma's photo stared out from every street corner, and still, nothing. Attention briefly shifted to another name in Emma's orbit, Linda Gray, a fellow actress who had once competed with her for a role. Linda insisted she had nothing to do with Emma's disappearance, and her alibi was accepted at the time. But whispers about rivalries in Hollywood only added to the drama. Despite multiple suspects, nothing concrete emerged. By the end of the summer of 2004, the investigation had hit a wall. Emma's car sat in a police impound lot. Her last known movements were frozen in blurry security footage outside a West Hollywood bar. Witness statements were vague, evidence was thin, and without a body, prosecutors had nowhere to go. The case was filed as a missing person. Months later, it would be reclassified as a cold case. Emma Scott's disappearance was no longer just the story of a young actress chasing her dream. It became a cautionary tale in Hollywood, a reminder of the industry's darker undercurrents, ambition, secrecy, and power colliding in ways that could swallow a life whole. For investigators, the question lingered. Had Emma been silenced because of what she knew, or simply because of who she was last seen with? For her family, one truth remained. She walked into that July night full of hope for her future, and she never walked out again. The investigation quickly narrowed in on 3 names. Each of them had reasons to fear Emma, and each of them was pulled into the spotlight as detectives tried to understand what had happened that night. The first was Paul Henderson. He was a powerful film producer, well connected in Hollywood and beyond. More importantly, he was the last person caught on camera with Emma. Surveillance footage from outside the West Hollywood bar showed Emma leaving just before midnight. Walking next to her, dressed in a tailored suit, was Henderson. They stepped into the night together, and from that moment on, Emma was never seen again. That simple fact made Henderson the #1 suspect. There was more. Henderson's wife had gone public only weeks earlier, accusing Emma of destroying her marriage. She filed papers in court, calling Emma a homewrecker. But just as quickly as the case appeared, it disappeared. The complaint was suddenly withdrawn. Still, Henderson wasn't easy to confront. He wasn't just another man with secrets. He had wealth, connections, and influence. Every step the police took toward him was met with resistance. Lawyers showed up quickly. Phone calls were made to city officials. Investigators later admitted there was real pressure to tread lightly. But at least in the eyes of the public, Henderson looked guilty. He had motive, he had opportunity, and he had the power to make a young woman vanish without a trace. The second suspect was Ryan Blake, Emma's ex-boyfriend. He was nothing like Henderson. Where Henderson was polished and respected, Ryan was broken and unstable. At 27, he was an underground musician who never made it beyond dive bars and unpaid gigs. Friends described him as jealous, erratic, and deeply insecure about Emma's rising career. Neighbors remembered hearing fights through the thin walls of their apartment building when they were still together. Screaming, slamming doors, the sounds of anger. When Emma disappeared, Ryan was an easy target. He didn't have money. He didn't have lawyers. What he did have was a messy past with the victim and a temper he couldn't always control. Police interrogated him again and again, sometimes for hours on end. Under pressure, Ryan finally broke. Exhausted and cornered, he told detectives that he had hurt Emma. On paper, it looked like a confession, but the details didn't add up. Ryan couldn't describe where, when, or how. His story shifted every time he spoke. Defense attorneys and outside observers called it a textbook case of a coerced confession. They argued Ryan said what police wanted to hear because he was desperate to end the interrogation. Eventually, he recanted everything, and when investigators went back to check, they found no physical evidence linking him to Emma's car, her apartment, or the night she vanished. Even so, Ryan's life was nearly destroyed. He came close to being indicted, and in the court of public opinion, he was branded a monster. For years, people whispered that he was the one who had gotten away with murder. The third suspect hardly drew attention at first. Her name was Linda Gray, a 32-year-old actress who had been working in television.
Linda told police she had been with a friend the night Emma disappeared. It wasn't airtight. The friend couldn't be found to verify it. But compared to Henderson, the man last seen with Emma, and Ryan, the jealous ex with a shaky confession, Linda didn't stand out as a serious threat. Detectives logged her statement and moved on. The press barely mentioned her at all. She was treated as a footnote in a story that seemed to revolve around the powerful producer and the bitter ex-boyfriend. Looking at the three suspects side by side painted a complicated picture. Henderson had been seen with Emma, his story didn't check out, and he had a clear motive to keep her silent. Ryan had the history of violence, the unstable temper, and a supposed confession that the police almost ran with. Linda had competition and personal animosity, but no one connected her directly to the night Emma vanished. To the media, it was simple. They latched onto Henderson as the high-profile suspect, the man with money and motive. Headlines called it Hollywood's darkest secret. Ryan became the tragic figure, the struggling musician almost railroaded into prison. Linda, the actress with a loose alibi, faded into the background. Almost no one imagined she could have been the real killer. But that was the tragedy of the early investigation. Detectives poured nearly all of their time into Henderson and Ryan. Weeks were lost chasing down their alibis, their phone records, their movements. Linda was barely scrutinized. Evidence that might have connected her to Emma was overlooked. By the end of that summer, the police had their list of suspects, but no hard evidence to tie any of them to the crime. Henderson's lawyers kept him insulated. Ryan walked free despite the cloud of suspicion. And Linda Gray, calm, overlooked, and quietly carrying her own secrets, slipped through unnoticed. It would take more than a decade before anyone realized just how dangerous that mistake was. The days after Emma Scott's disappearance turned into a storm. News vans crowded outside police headquarters, paparazzi hounded anyone connected to the case, and Hollywood tabloids splashed her name across front pages. Headlines called it the Hollywood disappearance, a young actress, 24 years old, gone without a trace after leaving a bar with a powerful producer. The pressure on detectives was immediate. Cameras followed them as they walked in and out of the station. Reporters demanded answers, asking why no arrests had been.
From the beginning, Paul Henderson stood at the center of suspicion. He was the last person seen with Emma. Surveillance footage showed them leaving together just before midnight. For investigators, that fact alone was enough to put his name at the top of their list. But what made it worse was the scandal in his marriage. His wife had gone public weeks earlier, accusing Emma of breaking up their home. She filed legal papers calling Emma a mistress. Then, almost as suddenly, she withdrew them. No explanation was ever given. Whispers spread through the industry that Henderson had used money and influence to make the problem go away. When detectives brought Henderson in, he repeated the same story. He said he had only given Emma a ride, dropped her at a hotel, and left. But hotel records showed no trace of her checking in. Nobody at the front desk remembered her. No staff members saw her enter. His story didn't match the evidence. Still, Henderson wasn't easy to pin down. He had the best lawyers money could buy. They built walls around him, blocking investigators at every turn. His legal team produced receipts, schedules, phone calls, anything that could muddy the timeline. Detectives faced enormous pressure. Every time they pushed harder, city officials started receiving calls. Politicians, donors, people with ties to Henderson's world. The message was clear: be careful. In the media, Henderson was painted as the powerful suspect who might have made a young woman vanish. But inside the investigation, he was untouchable. With Henderson protected, the focus shifted to Emma's ex-boyfriend, Ryan Blake. Ryan didn't have power, lawyers, or money. What he had was a stormy history with Emma. Neighbors remembered fights, shouting, doors slamming in the night. Friends said he was jealous of her career, insecure and angry. To the police, Ryan was the easy target. They brought him in for questioning over and over. Each session ran for hours. Detectives pressed him about Emma, about the night she disappeared, about whether he followed her after the casting call. Exhausted, cornered, Ryan finally broke. He said words the police had been waiting for. Even so, Ryan was nearly destroyed. His name was dragged through headlines. People whispered that he had confessed and gotten away with murder. He wasn't charged, but he was condemned in the court of public opinion. For years he carried the label of the man who might have killed Emma Scott. While Henderson and Ryan dominated the headlines, Linda Gray slipped into the background. She was older, an actress whose career had faded and had once competed with Emma for roles. Investigators recorded her statement. She claimed she had been with a friend the night Emma disappeared. The alibi wasn't solid, but compared to Henderson and Ryan, Linda didn't seem like a priority. Detectives moved on. The press ignored her. In the frenzy of scandal, Linda was written off as little more than gossip. But as the official investigation stalled, Hollywood gossip only grew louder. Emma's name became tied to stories she never had the chance to defend. The most damaging were the rumors of trading favors for roles. Colleagues whispered about late-night parties, hotel suites, private gatherings where lines between work and exploitation blurred. Some said Emma had been invited to secret events hosted by producers with too much money and too much power. None of it was proven, but in the absence of evidence, rumors became truth for many. The same industry that once welcomed Emma now split into camps. Some pitied her, saying she had been chewed up and discarded by a system that preys on young women. Others judged her, dismissing her as reckless, ambitious, willing to do anything for fame. For the investigation, the rumors were poison. Sympathy for Emma faded. What began as a manhunt for a missing actress turned into a tabloid scandal about parties, affairs, and power plays. Detectives found themselves fighting not just for evidence, but against public apathy. Meanwhile, the forensic trail went cold. Emma's car, abandoned by the highway, gave them nothing. No blood, no fingerprints beyond her own. The keys were left in the ignition. Her purse and phone were gone. There was no security footage of where the car had been left. Without a body, there was no proof of murder. Emma Scott's disappearance joined the long list of unsolved Hollywood mysteries. A bright young woman with everything ahead of her, reduced to another tragic headline. Her dream of becoming an actress ended not with applause, but with questions that no one could answer. And for more than a decade, the truth about what really happened to Emma Scott stayed buried, hidden behind influence, fear, and the mistakes of an investigation that lost its way. By the end of 2005, the disappearance of Emma Scott was officially marked as a cold case. The investigation had stalled, the leads had dried up, and without a body or physical evidence, detectives admitted they had nowhere left to go. For Emma's family, it was a devastating confirmation. They kept calling for answers, writing letters, holding small vigils. But Hollywood had already moved on. New scandals took over the headlines, and Emma's name became a faint memory, mentioned only in articles about dreams cut short in the City of Stars. For almost a decade, her case sat in storage boxes, gathering dust. To most, she was another tragic name lost in Hollywood's long list of unsolved mysteries. But in 2015, something unexpected cracked through the silence. Mark Lewis, a man who had once worked as a production assistant in the indie film world, came forward with a story. Back in 2004, just days before Emma vanished, he said he had seen something that never left his mind. It wasn't just gossip, and it wasn't a rumor. It was a tape. According to Mark, the tape captured one of the infamous private parties that some producers were known for hosting. These weren't industry mixers. They were closed-door events where famous faces mingled with rising stars, where favors were traded, and where reputations could be destroyed in an instant if the wrong details slipped out. Mark said Emma was on that tape, and the way she appeared left her vulnerable. She was caught in a setting that could easily spark scandal. But the tape vanished. Mark remembered that during the very week Emma disappeared, the footage disappeared too. It had been stored in the office of a small production company, and then
The public response was explosive. Commentators speculated that Emma had been silenced because she knew too much. Social media buzzed with theories about who might have been at that party and what Emma might have seen. Some claimed the missing tape was the reason she never came home. Police, under mounting attention, retraced their steps. They pulled out the old evidence, revisiting files that hadn't been touched in years. DNA samples that had been preserved from Emma's abandoned car were re-examined with updated technology. Detectives reached out to people who had been in the West Hollywood bar that night. They questioned hotel staff once again, searching for any memory of Emma ever checking in. Paul Henderson was called back for questioning. More than 10 years had passed since he was first accused of being the last man seen with Emma. He denied everything again, insisting he had given her a ride and nothing more. His lawyers hammered the same point to the press. If there had been proof, why hadn't he been arrested back then? Henderson was polished and calm, but the public never stopped seeing him as the man who had walked away with Emma on that last night. Ryan Blake, Emma's ex-boyfriend, was also pulled back into the orbit of the case. He had lived for years under the shadow of suspicion, branded as the jealous musician who might have killed her. Detectives questioned him once more, but they found nothing new. His name resurfaced in headlines, but no evidence tied him to Emma's disappearance. And then there was Linda Gray. The actress had been a footnote in the original investigation, mentioned briefly and then dismissed. She had offered a weak alibi, saying she was with a friend who never publicly confirmed it. But the police never pressed her hard. Now, with the case open again, her name appeared once more. Still, almost no one took her seriously. She wasn't powerful, she wasn't wealthy, and compared to Henderson or Ryan, she looked like a minor character in a much bigger drama. But the mention of the missing tape kept everything in motion. Detectives couldn't ignore it. If Emma had been caught on film at a secret party, the risk wasn't only to her reputation. It meant she may have had leverage, or knowledge that could ruin others. And in Hollywood, that kind of knowledge could be dangerous. By late 2015, the case was alive again, but the answers remained just out of reach. Henderson stood firm behind his lawyers. Ryan was dragged back into...
The reinvestigation raised more questions than answers, and though the world was talking about Emma again, the truth was still waiting in the shadows. In 2018, more than 14 years after Emma Scott vanished, a turning point arrived from the most unexpected place. Linda Gray, now in her mid-40s, appeared on a television interview. It was meant to be a routine segment, a chance for an aging actress to reflect on her career. But in the middle of the conversation, Linda slipped. She mentioned a detail about the night of July 12, 2004. A detail that had never been made public. Not in police records, not in the press, not even whispered in rumors. Detectives watching the program immediately froze. How could Linda know this, unless she had been there? That slip was enough to reopen old doubts. Detectives revisited Linda's original statement from 2004. Her alibi had always been shaky. She claimed she was with a friend, but the friend was never located. Back then, investigators pushed her aside, distracted by the chaos surrounding Paul Henderson and Ryan Blake. But in 2018, with new technology and renewed pressure, Linda was suddenly no longer a background figure. She was back in the spotlight. Police began to rebuild her profile. They traced every rumor that connected her to Emma. Industry insiders spoke of tension between the two women. Some remembered seeing them compete for the same role in an indie film. Emma got the callback. Linda didn't. Others said Emma had learned something about Linda's private life, something damaging enough that she might have used it as leverage. At the time, it had sounded like gossip. 14 years later, those stories carried new weight. Witnesses who had been interviewed in 2004 were called back. One recalled seeing Emma and Linda outside the bar on the night Emma disappeared. The witness described a heated argument, voices raised, hands gesturing sharply in the dark. In the chaos of the original investigation, that testimony had been brushed aside, overshadowed by the more glamorous suspects. Now it became a cornerstone of the case. The next breakthrough came from science. Back in 2004, forensic testing was limited. Samples collected from Emma's car were logged but not fully analyzed. By 2018, DNA technology had advanced dramatically. The evidence was retested. On the passenger seat, technicians found a single strand of hair. On the door handle, a faint trace of biological material. Both matched Linda Gray. For investigators, this was the first piece of hard evidence tying Linda directly to Emma. It wasn't circumstantial gossip. It wasn't the words of a bitter ex-boyfriend or a jealous spouse. It was science. And science didn't lie. The media erupted. Headlines shouted, "Linda Gray, forgotten suspect, back in the frame." News stations replayed clips of Linda's television slip over and over. Tabloids ran side-by-side photos of Emma's bright smile and Linda's weary face. Linda fired back, insisting she was being scapegoated. She told reporters, "They've spent 14 years chasing the wrong people, and now they want to pin it on me." But the tide of public opinion was shifting. For the first time, people began to wonder if the police had overlooked the obvious. Detectives pressed forward. Linda was brought in for questioning, again and again. At first, she denied everything. She stuck to her story about being with a friend. According to her confession, Emma died that night. Linda admitted she moved the body and tried to hide it. She claimed she acted alone, burying Emma in a remote area on the outskirts of Los Angeles. But her story was filled with contradictions. Investigators suspected someone might have helped her, but no additional accomplice was ever identified. What mattered was that Linda herself admitted responsibility for Emma's death. The revelation shocked Hollywood. For years, the world had focused on Paul Henderson, the powerful producer, or Ryan Blake, the unstable ex-boyfriend. Both men had been torn apart by suspicion. Henderson's career collapsed under the weight of scandal. Ryan nearly lost his freedom after a coerced confession. And yet, neither man had been guilty of killing Emma. The true killer was Linda Gray, the woman most people barely remembered. Her arrest was swift. She was charged with first-degree murder. Cameras swarmed the courthouse as Linda was led in, handcuffed, eyes cast downward. Reporters shouted questions she refused to answer. For the family of Emma Scott, it was both a relief and a heartbreak. They finally had an answer, but the truth was almost too cruel to accept. The case became a cautionary tale. Investigators and journalists reflected on how easily Linda had slipped through the cracks. Because she wasn't rich, because she wasn't loud, because she wasn't in the headlines, she was treated as a minor suspect. For more than a decade, The real killer lived freely, while others carried the weight of suspicion. The public was stunned. Commentators called it one of the most shocking reversals in Hollywood history. To discover that the quiet, overlooked actress, not the powerful producer, not the bitter ex, had been the one to end Emma's life was almost unthinkable. But it was the truth. And it reminded everyone how dangerous assumptions could be in an investigation. In the end, Linda Gray's confession closed the circle. After 14 years of rumors, false leads, and broken lives, the case of Emma Scott had its answer. Not the answer people expected, but the answer that justice demanded.
The media called it Hollywood justice. Every major network sent crews to cover it. Headlines filled the front pages. News anchors introduced Emma's name to an audience that included people who had been children when she first disappeared. Reporters broadcast live updates from outside the courthouse every day. Inside, the seats were packed. Family members, former colleagues, curious onlookers, and even those who had once criticized the police for ignoring Linda's weak alibi. For many, this trial was not just about one actress's fate. It was about whether the system could deliver justice after so many years of failure. Linda did not walk into court unprepared. She had money, connections, and influence built over decades in the industry. She used all of it to assemble one of the strongest defense teams in the country. Her lawyers were well known for high-profile trials, the kind who had once defended politicians and celebrities and won. They framed Linda not as a killer, but as a woman caught in a tragic accident. According to them, Emma provoked her, threatening to reveal damaging rumors that could end her career. They argued that the confrontation was heated, emotional, and unplanned. Linda, they said, acted in panic, not malice.
The defense went further. They tried to reshape the image of Emma. They suggested Emma was manipulative, that she had used her beauty and ambition to climb through Hollywood by targeting people like Linda. They used rumors that Emma had attended secret parties and that she kept damaging information about others. To them, Emma was a young woman willing to gamble with reputations to get ahead. If Linda lost her temper that night, they said, it was because she was cornered by someone dangerous. The prosecution refused to let the narrative shift. They called experts, detectives, and witnesses who had been ignored in the original investigation. They presented DNA results from Emma's car, showing a hair strand that matched Linda. They brought forward witnesses who had finally spoken out, saying they saw Emma and Linda arguing near the bar on the night of July 12, 2004. And then there was Linda's own voice, her confession, given after months of interrogation, when the evidence closed in around her. In that statement, Linda admitted she struck Emma during an argument, and that Emma never stood up again. The prosecutors made it clear. This was not a panicked shove. It was a calculated cover-up that lasted more than a decade. Linda had lied, misled investigators, and lived freely while Emma's family mourned without answers. Accidents do not leave DNA in a car. Accidents do not vanish for 14 years, the lead prosecutor told the jury. This was not a moment of panic. This was a choice, and the choice was to silence Emma Scott forever. For nearly 2 months, the courtroom became the center of national attention. Testimony was dissected on talk shows. Cable news channels debated the defense's strategy. Some commentators argued the trial was about more than one woman's death. It was about a culture that allowed silence and fear to cover up crimes for years. When it came time for the verdict, the tension inside the courtroom was unbearable. Linda sat expressionless, her lawyers whispering beside her. Emma's mother sat in the front row clutching a framed photograph of her daughter. The jury entered, 12 ordinary citizens, asked to decide the fate of a woman who had once been a familiar face on television screens. The foreperson stood. Guilty of murder in the first degree. The words echoed across the room. Gasps, muffled cries, and the sound of Emma's mother breaking down in tears filled the silence. The judge delivered the sentence: life in prison without parole. For Linda Gray, the career that had once promised fame ended in disgrace. For Emma Scott, justice had finally been spoken in a place where it mattered most. The impact on Emma's family was profound. For 15 years they had lived in limbo, never knowing what happened, never sure if anyone would be held responsible. Now they had answers. To honor her, they established the Emma Scott Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting young actors and actresses. The foundation offered scholarships, mentorship programs, and advocacy for safer working environments in the entertainment industry. Emma's mother, once a quiet figure in the background, became a leading voice in campaigns against harassment and abuse in Hollywood. She stood on stages, in interviews, and in classrooms, telling Emma's story not just as a tragedy, but as a warning. Others involved in the case also faced their own legacies. Ryan Blake, who had nearly been destroyed by a coerced confession, was officially cleared of any suspicion. The police department acknowledged mistakes in handling his interrogation. Ryan became a symbol of wrongful pressure in investigations, proof of how desperation for answers can push detectives toward the wrong conclusion. Though his music career never recovered, Ryan finally walked free of suspicion. Paul Henderson, the producer once considered the most likely suspect, never faced charges. But his reputation never healed. The accusations, the scandals, and the constant whispers followed him until he withdrew entirely from the public eye. He sold his properties, left Hollywood, and disappeared from the industry that had once bowed to him. The trial also shook the entertainment world itself. For years, people had whispered about the secret parties, the blurred lines between power and exploitation, the careers built on silence. Now those whispers became demands for change. New policies were drafted, new unions formed, and new laws passed in California to protect performers from abuse of power. For the first time, the culture of secrecy in Hollywood was forced into daylight. The press described the Emma Scott case as the moment Hollywood looked in the mirror. It was not just the story of a single actress lost too soon. It was a story about an industry that had enabled silence and ignored warning signs. It was a reminder that ambition, fear, and power could mix into something deadly.
As one journalist wrote in the days after the sentencing, Emma Scott never became a star on screen. But in death, she changed Hollywood forever. And that was the truth. A young woman's life was taken, but her story forced a reckoning that no one in Hollywood could ignore again.
Emma Scott's life ended in silence, but her story forced change. It proved that even after years of denial, truth can still rise to the surface. If you want more stories like this, cases that reveal what lies behind closed doors, make sure to subscribe, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video. Your support helps us keep these stories alive.